Your architectural drawings can look like they've been done by a professional if you focus on these 5 points. And the first point is make sure your vertical lines are vertical. And don't be fooled by how obvious this seems. I believe if our vertical lines aren't really vertical, it's the first and most obvious problem we see, or we at least feel when we see a drawing. So vertical lines are the up and down lines. And when we're drawing vertical elements of architecture, we want our lines to be as straight as possible. But not just straight, we want them to be at 90 degrees to the horizontal. And vertical lines that aren't truly vertical cause 2 problems. One is on the horizontal, when the lines are meant to be parallel and they're not. And so certain elements of our drawing start to look as though they're tilting or leaning. The other problem we have with vertical lines, and this is even more obvious, is when we stack them vertically. And they start to lean more and more the higher they get. What we need is for all of our vertical lines to be truly at right angles to the horizontal plane. And when they move across horizontally, we want all of them to be nice and parallel. And then as they go upwards, we want them to give either a straight line or an accurately stepped effect, whether they're stepping outwards, as in here, or inwards slightly, as in here. But what we want is all of our vertical lines, whether they're going up the page or across the page, to be not just straight, but at 90 degrees to our horizontal plane. And an easy and quick way of working out, is this a problem for you, is to just get some thin cardboard strips, find a drawing, and put the strips on some of the vertical lines that you've drawn to find out, do all of these lines look parallel when I look at them across the whole drawing, and do they align on the vertical as well? Because if this is going to be accurate, looking at this will tell me whether I've captured the angles correctly. And I'm not just worried about the line that I've put my cardboard on, I'm looking at other lines such as this skyscraper in the background that go with it. And now it's more obvious to me that, for instance, this line here is tilted. Fortunately, it's not a very long line, so it's not as obvious in the overall drawing. So why not get a few of your drawings and get the strips of cardboard and put them to the test? Because if we want our architectural drawings to look professional, then the verticals must be truly vertical at 90 degrees to the horizontal wherever they appear. My second point is about perspective, but it's not what you think. We're not worried about finding vanishing points and so forth. Rather, it's about seeing the pattern and ensuring that the pattern is captured in our lines, in our angles. Let me show you the patterns with this freehand drawing I did. If we line up the various horizontal lines in our drawing, what we get is not a series of parallel angles, but a fan shape. As the lines move up above our eye level, the angle increases. If we look at the space between these strips, we can see that the space is wider at this end than it is at this end. I think of this as a fan pattern, because it reminds me of a fan. And so when I draw architecture, horizontal lines that go across my structure, or elements such as these pediments that line up horizontally, need to line up following this fan pattern. Sometimes the fan pattern is more extreme to see than it is here. So the angles become more extreme more quickly in this viewpoint from this perspective, but it's the same fan-shaped pattern. And what we have to make sure we don't do is instead to have lines that are parallel, that are the same angle, one above the other, instead of increasing in angle. Drawing our perspective angles in parallel lines rather than in lines of increasing angle is probably the second most obvious thing for making our architectural drawings not look very professionally done. The third way we can make our architectural drawings look as if they've been done by a professional is to not forget to put in the depth lines. So here we have a window similar to many windows I've seen. Let me draw the same window now, add in the depth lines to see the difference. This is important because in real life, objects have height and they have breadth, but they also have depth. And it's this depth line that we need to make sure we include where appropriate in our architectural drawings. Notice how this window could just be drawn on with a black marker onto the wall. It sits flat on the surface, whereas this window, where in a rough and gestural but still very real way, we've added the depth, we've added the penetration of the outer surface, we get a far more realistic three-dimensional look. And you can see here in these closest windows, I've drawn depth lines in the cavities where windows sit. And sometimes the cavities where windows sit are quite deeply set. And sometimes there's multiple lines that we have to draw to indicate staggering backwards into the building of various elements of the window decoration and framing. Sometimes it's quite simple. Where we see a window straight on, sometimes there aren't many depth lines to draw, or they can be underneath, looking up, as in this case. Or when the angle changes, they can be underneath, looking up, but also on one side. It all depends on the angle with which we're looking, but particularly for windows that are close to us, we want to allow that depth line, because particularly if we're going to hatch or use marker to indicate value, it's that depth line set back from the surface that gives us the space to put the marker to create the effect of shadow, which really heightens the effect of three-dimensionality. And depth lines are not merely where windows penetrate cavities. They're also the underneaths of cornices that we see as we're looking up. And while it's usually not possible to draw every line to create the exact detail, we need to draw enough lines to create the effect of the three-dimensionality of stepped back overhanging cornices or stepped inwards window framings, or whatever ornamentation or architectural elements that are three-dimensional that we're wanting to represent. When we omit our depth lines, we end up with flat, cartoony features on our architectural structures, which will stop our drawings having that professional look to them. My fourth point is to pay attention to foreshortening, to pay attention to the fact that as objects move away from us, they become smaller. They don't just shrink in height, which produces these perspective angles coming down, but they also get smaller in their width, going across. This is most easily seen if we think of a rectangle that we look straight on at, and if we put in the diagonals, they cross at the halfway point. We have an equal width on each side of where the diagonals cross. But if we draw a rectangle that's moving away from us, the way perhaps a large building that we were looking at side on might look, and if we draw its diagonals, we can see, in fact, that the, if you like, halfway point is much further towards the far side. It is nowhere near the middle, which would put it about there. And that means that if we have an equal number of windows across the entire width, if we have, say, 3 windows on each side of the halfway mark, then 3 of them will fit here and 3 of them will fit here. And so clearly they're going to be the same proportion but different sizes. And we don't have 3 the same here and 3 the same here, because we can see that if we would divide our building into 4 equal spaces, that in this half, the closer quarter is significantly larger than the further quarter. And so it's this progressive narrowing of our building as it moves away from us that affects how things on the building front, such as windows, are going to look. So when we draw streetscapes, we need to pay careful attention that we're decreasing the width of the buildings as they move further away. So in this building here in Edinburgh, we have 3 equal widths defined by the downpipes, 1, 2, 3. But you can see how they get narrower as they move further away. And this building that's divided into 2 equal parts becomes narrower as it moves away. And therefore, the windows become narrower as they move further along. And the 5th way we can have our drawings look as though they were drawn by professionals is to work hard at capturing the effect of detail, not trying to actually draw all the detail. So drawing the effects of the stonework rather than getting bogged down in drawing too many individual stones may look something such as this in a quick gestural freehand drawing. It may look like this on a smaller scale drawing with larger stones. It may look like this when we're looking at brickwork rather than stonework, or it may look more like this when we're looking at a very large object from some distance. How we capture the effect of what we're looking at depends on the scale with which we're drawing it. In the same way, on a streetscape, pavers or cobblestones may look like this, or they may demand more attention and have more detail drawn to suggest what we're seeing over the whole scene, but still becoming more and more suggestive the further away from us the detail moves. If we're drawing architectural sculptures, even close up, we're still wanting to suggest the detail, not to have to do life drawing class drawings of people. We're wanting to capture the key elements of the poses and the fabrics and the support objects of the scene to suggest what's happening rather than trying to get bogged down in drawing it. On a further away scale, such as these large sculptures on the Arc de Triomphe, we can simplify our forms more. And when perhaps a smaller size of sculpture, we can simplify what we draw even more to create the effect at a glance. What happens if we try and draw these sculptural elements too precisely, too exactly, is we won't have room and we'll probably find it hard to do a reasonable job, and it will attract attention away from the architecture. If we enjoy drawing interior architecture, then this can become important when we have objects such as painted ceilings, where we need to suggest that there is a painting on the ceiling without trying to draw the painting. And this is where values become important, whether we hatch them or whether we use marker or watercolor to create them. What we don't want to do is to get caught up drawing figures and scenes on the roof when the main subject is the architecture of the interior. And yet we still need to suggest, and the same is with ornamental patterns. We still need to suggest them, and we need to, if you like, deform them according to the curvature or the angle of the surface that they're on. But we don't want to start drawing them too exactly. We want the main architectural elements to stand out. So we're seeking to capture the effect of the detail, the effect of the artworks, of the ornamentation in our scene. And of course, with people, it's the same. Whether we're in an internal space and have a crowd of people, we want to capture the effect of the crowd. We don't want to start drawing lots of details. And it's exactly the same if we're in the street, except that quite probably we're going to have larger crowds that go back further. But if we draw the closest figures with a little more precision, we can then just be very suggestive as the crowd as it moves back. If we leave the detail out, or if we try and draw it too exactly, then our architectural drawings are quite possibly going to look less professional than we would like. Learning to capture the amount of detail and just the right amount of detail for the size drawing that we're doing and the style that we're drawing it in is a really important part of having our drawings look professional. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found these 5 points interesting and helpful, and particularly if there's one or two that you can focus on in your next drawing, then I think these will have been a very helpful few minutes of video watching. But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, whatever techniques you use to draw it with, and quite frankly, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.